I know why you came back. You want to know what my daddy did in that house. You've been carrying a picture in your head for a week now. A picture of a man and a woman and blood on the floor. I'm going to tell you everything tonight. Everything I saw. Everything I heard. Everything a 12-year-old girl pressed against the side of a house in the rain understood about what was happening inside. And I need you to stay with me until the very end. Because there's something about my daddy that I've been sitting with for 60 years. Something I've never said out loud. Tonight, I'm going to say it. My name is Hattie Mae Cross. Last week I told you about my mama, the woman who kept 4 children alive while their father sat in a chair and stared through a window. Tonight, I need to tell you about my daddy, James Otis Cross. Because by the time he knocked on Gloria Carter's door that night, the important part had already happened. The real story started months earlier, in a chair beside a window, while the rest of us watched him disappear. My daddy worked 32 years at the Macon brickworks. 6 days a week, he never missed a day. Every Friday he brought his whole pay envelope home, entirely unopened. He'd set it on the kitchen counter and go wash the clay off his hands, while Mama counted it out. That was the whole marriage. He brought it, she made it into something. And for 32 years, it worked. He smelled like red clay, machine oil, and dignity. He used to tell me, Hattie Mae, a man who talks about how hard he works probably does not work hard enough. He said that to me exactly once. I never forgot it. You have to understand what the brickworks was to a black man in Macon, Georgia, in 1963. It was the one place in that city where you could point to something solid, something that would still be standing in 100 years and say, I made that. My daddy spent 3 decades making things that lasted. And then, on a Tuesday morning in the spring, a piece of cardboard on a rusted chain told him the gate was closed for good. That is not losing a job. That is having your whole self taken away with a piece of cardboard and a chain. He sat in that chair for 3 weeks straight after the gate closed, staring out that window. The house had 2 ghosts in it by October. One in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and one in that chair all day long. And 4 children learning how to walk quietly around both of them. I used to watch him from the safety of the dark hallway, the same way I watch Mama at the kitchen table late at night. I was 12 years old, and somewhere down inside, I learned there are different ways people disappear. Mama disappeared inward into herself, went somewhere quiet and locked inside herself. Daddy disappeared outward into that chair. One vanished where nobody could reach her. The other vanished where everybody could see. By October, the damp cold had settled deep into the old floorboards, and I need to tell you something about those 3 weeks that I am not proud of. I was angrier at my daddy during those weeks than I have ever been at another living soul. Not because of the chair, because of what his sitting did to my mama. I watched her work twice as hard so he wouldn't know she was working at all. She moved around that house trying to take up less space, shrinking herself down so he would have more room to fall apart in. and I was 12 years old, and I thought, why is she the one who has to shrink? I have carried the shame of that anger for 60 years. My mama spent her life trying not to disturb anybody. Gloria Carter had never learned how, and Lord, the bottom never forgave her for it. The neighborhood said Gloria Carter was trouble wrapped up in a pretty dress. But the woman I sat with in her kitchen was nothing like the one the block invented. She was sharp, and Lord, she was funny. The dry, quiet kind of wit. There was an elderly woman on our block, Mrs. Ida Finn, who'd been doing laundry for a wealthy white family up on the hill for 11 long years. Gloria looked right at her ledger one afternoon and said, "Ida, they've been paying you 1952 rates for 11 years. Asking to be paid what you're worth is not causing trouble. Accepting less is just a slow theft of yourself." Mrs. Ida went back the next Monday and got her raise. That was Gloria. She fixed things quietly and moved on. Most people on that block didn't know what to make of a woman like that. Reverend Booker certainly didn't. He stood tall on her porch step one day to remind her that her soul needed desperate attending to. And then he asked, "Miss Carter, when are you going to come back to the Lord?" Gloria looked right at him, perfectly pleasant, and said, "Reverend, I never left the Lord. I left the building. Those are two entirely different things." And she shut the door. And that was the thing about Gloria Carter. People spend so much time trying to figure her out, they never noticed how carefully she was figuring them out. My daddy included. Gloria watched my daddy from a distance, not in a nosy way, not in the way people watch a problem, in the way people watch somebody carrying something they know is too heavy. One evening she said to Mama, "Carly, your husband is a good man carrying something far too heavy for one man's shoulders." Mama looked down at whatever she was doing and didn't answer. Back then, everybody thought my daddy was holding up just fine. The children, the bills, the house, the worry, the grief. She saw the strain in him long before the rest of us knew what we were looking at. A few weeks later, she said, "The dangerous ones aren't the people who fall apart." She paused. "The dangerous ones are the people who keep going." Mama didn't say anything to that either. Neither would I have. Not after what came later. My daddy sat in that chair month after month, never knowing a woman on his own street understood exactly what was happening to him. And maybe that's one of the saddest things I've ever learned. Sometimes the truest kindnesses never reach us. They live only in other people's kitchens, late at night, between people too tired to say them to our faces. The cruel thing was, she understood him. He never understood her. Something about Gloria Carter unsettled my daddy. My daddy did not like Gloria Carter. He never said so in words, but I could read him in his silences, in the rigid set of his shoulders whenever she walked past our porch on her way up the hill. When her name came up at dinner, because Mama and Gloria had a private arrangement everyone on the block knew the surface of, and nobody knew the depth of, my daddy would go quiet. Not the quiet of a man who has nothing to say, the quiet of a man who has decided not to say what he is thinking. I asked him about it once when I was 10. "Daddy, how come you don't like Miss Gloria?" He looked at me for a long time and said, "Some women make things harder for other women without meaning to, just by being what they are." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I remember the way he said it. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Like he was talking about something much bigger than Gloria Carter. And maybe he was. Because for a man who supposedly wanted nothing to do with Gloria Carter, he walked 6 blocks through the rain to her house at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was late October. I was 12 years old. I woke to the sound of my daddy getting dressed in the dark, not fumbling, not hesitating, moving like a man who had already made up his mind. What caught my attention wasn't that he was leaving, it was what he didn't do. Every night before bed, my daddy checked on us, counted us, made sure we were all there. That night he walked straight out the door and left us in the dark. I followed him. The rain was coming down hard enough to blur the streetlights. I stayed back in the shadows. 6 blocks. Not once did he stop. Not once did he look around. He went straight to Gloria Carter's house. Then he knocked. 3 times. Soft, like a signal. The door opened almost immediately. She stepped backward and let him straight inside, the exact way you open a door for someone you have been actively waiting for. I crept beneath the front window. Rainwater streamed down the glass. The voices inside were impossible to make out at first. Not angry, heavy. The kind of conversation people have when something has already gone wrong. Then I heard the third voice, a man's voice. Not my daddy, not anyone I recognized. Low, controlled. The sort of voice that never needed to get louder to sound dangerous. Then something crashed, a heavy sound, not a dropped glass, something worse. And then I heard my daddy. One word, stop. By the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, it was over. My daddy was sitting on the hardwood floor. Gloria's head rested in his lap. She was conscious, bleeding. The blood on the floor belonged to her. The other man was gone. The police took a few statements, wrote a few things down, and left. Nobody was arrested. Nobody came back. I went home that night with a question that stayed with me for years. Who had been inside that house? The man who spent 32 years taking care of his family? Or the man who walked through a storm to Gloria Carter's door at 2 in the morning? I didn't know. By sunrise, the neighborhood had already built its own version of the story. The kind people build when they have decided who the villain is before they know the facts. Gloria's name was in those stories. So was my daddy's. I heard every word, and I said nothing. I was 12 years old, and I was terrified somebody would ask me questions I wasn't ready to answer. My daddy never defended himself. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. Years later, when I finally asked him why, he looked at me and said, "Some things you do not explain, Hattie Mae. You either did right or you didn't. And the people who need to know already know." I didn't understand that answer then. Truthfully, I'm still not sure I do. But I know this. The story the neighborhood told was a lie, because the woman they thought they knew was not the woman who opened that door. And the man they thought they knew was not the man whose voice came through that window. Gloria Carter was still there the next morning, walking past our porch, head high, gloves white, giving nobody an explanation, as if she had made peace with the fact that nobody would believe the truth anyway. And maybe she was right, because nobody on our block understood what Gloria Carter was carrying. Not Reverend Booker, not the church, not the neighbors. Not even my mama. I certainly didn't. Not then. What I knew was this. A man had come to her house. A man had left before the police arrived. My daddy had shown up in the middle of the night, and Gloria Carter had been waiting for him. Those pieces never fit together, not for 60 years, until my daughter opened a box. A box I had spent most of my life pretending didn't exist. She asked me what was inside. I told her I would explain it when I was ready. Tonight, I think I am out of time. Because the man whose voice I heard through that rain-soaked window, the man who disappeared before the police arrived, the man whose name I have kept buried for 6 decades, was Reverend Booker. And before I can tell you what happened on that floor, I have to tell you who Gloria Carter really was. Next time, I'm going to introduce you to Gloria Carter, the real one. Not the woman the neighborhood invented, the woman she actually was. The one who had been carrying a secret for 19 years that nobody in the bottom knew about. And when you understand what Gloria was carrying, then you will finally understand why Reverend Booker was in that house, why my daddy was on that floor, and why some stories can stay buried for 60 years before they finally demand to be told. You come back now. You hear me?